Weddings today are big productions, but if you were to hop in a time machine and attend a wedding in medieval Europe, you would quickly discover just how shockingly different and often downright wild those ceremonies could be. Forget white gowns, floral centerpieces, and elegant invitations. A medieval wedding was part legal contract, part social alliance, and sometimes part drunken village-wide celebration that could stretch for days. Beneath the surface of vows and veils lay layers of culture, religion, politics, and raw human emotion. Marriage in the medieval world was rarely about love. While romantic stories like Tristan and Isolde or Lancelot and Guinevere may have captured hearts through tales of star-crossed lovers, these were more fantasy than reality. For most people, especially among the nobility, marriage was a business transaction. Families used it to secure alliances, transfer property, and climb social ladders. In the eyes of both church and state, marriage was less a bond of passion than it was a strategic move. If you were a peasant, the stakes were a little different, but still practical. A wedding might help bring more hands to the farm or forge a bond with a neighboring family that shared a field or a cow. Now imagine yourself at a wedding in the 12th century. There are no wedding planners or stylists. The bride might be barely a teenager, the groom not much older. The location? Likely not a church, as one might expect. While the church did play a role in marriage during the medieval period, especially by the later centuries, early medieval weddings were often conducted right at the door of the church, not inside it. The priest would bless the union outside the building, sometimes with a crowd of villagers gathered around. Only later would the couple enter to attend Mass, and speaking of the priest, he was not necessarily required at all. For much of the early medieval period, a wedding could be considered valid if the couple simply exchanged vows in front of witnesses. No fancy ceremony was needed, no rings, no long white dress. As long as the couple said they agreed to be married, and everyone heard them, it counted. This led to all sorts of interesting problems. Young couples might elope and claim to be married after whispering vows behind a barn. Parents could contest marriages after the fact. The church eventually cracked down on this informality, especially around the 12th century, requiring more formal recognition to curb clandestine unions. The clothes at a medieval wedding would hardly resemble today's Pinterest-worthy attire. There was no concept of a wedding dress as we know it. Brides simply wore their best outfit, which might be a richly colored gown made of wool or linen, possibly adorned with embroidery if they were lucky enough to afford it. White wasn't the tradition, it symbolized purity, but it was also wildly impractical in a world of muddy roads and open hearths. Brides preferred bold, expensive-looking colors to show off their family's wealth. Velvet, silk, and fur were common among the upper classes. While peasants wore the cleanest version of their everyday clothes, feasting played a massive role in the wedding celebration. If the family was wealthy, the banquet could last for several days. Guests might feast on roast meats, fresh breads, pottage, fruit pies, and even sweetmeats if the cooks were ambitious. Ale and wine flowed freely. In fact, the word honeymoon comes from this very tradition. The honey referred to mead, a honey-based drink believed to boost fertility, and the moon marked the month-long period newlyweds were expected to drink it to improve their chances of conceiving a child. The result? Lots of intoxicated guests, and a party atmosphere that could get more than a little unruly. Entertainment was another essential part of a medieval wedding. Minstrels, jesters, and dancers would perform to keep guests amused. Games and contests were common. Sometimes the wedding night itself became part of the show. In some traditions, guests would escort the bride and groom to their chamber, often with lewd jokes and songs, before ceremoniously tucking them into bed. Privacy was a luxury. In some noble households, a witness might even be required to confirm the consummation of the marriage. Yes, someone might have to sit outside the room to make sure everything went according to plan. Dowries and bride prices were another fascinating, if not entirely romantic, element of medieval marriage. A dowry was money or property brought by the bride's family to her husband. In contrast, a bride price was something paid by the groom or his family to the bride's family. Depending on the region and class, either or both might be expected. These arrangements were crucial. A well-negotiated dowry could secure a powerful marriage, while a poor one might doom a girl to spinsterhood or a convent. The financial negotiations sometimes took longer than the wedding itself. Among the nobility, marriages were often arranged when children were still in the cradle. Betrothals could occur years before the couple was of marriageable age. Once they reached maturity, typically around age 12 for girls and 14 for boys, the wedding would be carried out, sometimes long before either partner had the faintest idea of how to run a household, let alone a marriage. Love was supposed to grow later, ideally. In many cases, it never did. Fidelity was expected of women, but noblemen frequently maintained mistresses, a double standard that the church often turned a blind eye toward. Yet not all was bleak and cold-hearted, in villages and among the lower classes, where alliances mattered less and survival was the shared goal. Affection sometimes blossomed. People married for companionship or attraction, even if it was less frequent. There are records of couples seeking annulments or divorces because they had been forced into marriage, though these were rarely granted. The church recognized the importance of free consent, at least in theory. That meant, technically, a marriage was invalid if one or both parties had been coerced. Of course, free was a relative term in a world where saying no to your parents could bring shame or worse. The role of the church grew steadily stronger by the High and Late Middle Ages. By the 13th century, the church had tightened its grip on what counted as a legitimate marriage. Priests were increasingly involved in officiating. Banns were read aloud in church before the wedding to give anyone the chance to object, and more emphasis was placed on public vows. This shift helped solidify marriage as a sacrament and tried to reduce the ambiguity around clandestine unions. But even then, enforcement was inconsistent, and local customs still shaped how weddings were performed. There were even seasonal rules. Some times of year were considered inauspicious for marriage, such as Lent and Advent, when religious fasting made celebration inappropriate. This meant many weddings happened in late spring or early summer, after Easter and before the harvest season began. In some places, May was avoided because it was believed to be a month of bad luck for lovers. Superstition blended seamlessly with doctrine and tradition. Cultural differences also played a role. In parts of Scandinavia or the Celtic fringes of Britain, older pagan customs lingered. Hand fasting, a ritual where couples had their hands bound together, was practiced in some areas well into the Christian era. This ceremony could serve as a temporary or trial marriage, especially useful in rural communities far from church authority. Over time, hand fasting evolved into a romantic symbol, but originally it was a practical solution to managing relationships in the absence of official clergy. In the end, medieval weddings reflected the broader realities of the time. They were shaped by survival, social hierarchy, religion, and deeply embedded tradition. They were rarely about personal happiness, though they could become joyful events. They brought people together, for better or worse, in a world where community mattered more than individual desire. They involved food, festivity, legal wrangling, family pressure, and the ever-watchful eye of the church. So if you ever find yourself daydreaming about being whisked away to a medieval castle for a romantic wedding, remember what you are really asking for. That wedding might involve two teenagers who have never met, an awkward public bedding ceremony, and a feast where half the guests are passed out from drinking too much mead. It might include gossip, bargaining over livestock, and a priest who barely showed up on time. But it would also be a rare chance for joy in a harsh world, a moment when an entire village paused its labor to laugh, eat, and dance. Medieval weddings were not the fairy tales we imagine today, but they were unforgettable in their own chaotic human way. Thanks for joining us on this journey back in time to the world of medieval weddings. As you've seen, they were nothing like the carefully choreographed ceremonies we know today. It's from alliances forged in the cradle to public celebrations that sometimes got a little too wild. These weddings were rooted in practicality, survival, and deeply ingrained traditions. But even in a time when love wasn't always the driving force, there was still joy, community, and the occasional surprise romance. Life was hard in the Middle Ages, and weddings gave people a rare chance to laugh, feast, and momentarily forget the struggles of everyday life. If you found yourself fascinated by the customs, the chaos, and the charm of medieval matrimony, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We've got more tales from the past coming your way, each one packed with the strange, gritty, unforgettable truths of history that textbooks tend to skip. Share your thoughts below. Would you survive a medieval wedding, or would you sneak out before the bedding ceremony? Either way, we're glad you came along for the ride. Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and remember, the past is often wilder than we imagine.